During the March 28th General Committee meeting at Barrie City Hall, the City Council showed opposition to the federal and provincial government policies aimed at increasing density to mitigate housing shortages. Hi, this is Deepak and you're watching Simcoe Community Media. Canadian cities must permit up to 4 units per residential lot to be eligible for a portion of the $4 billion Housing Accelerator Fund provided by the federal government. As Barrie is scheduled to permit 4 units per lot to get the funds from the federal government, councillors are facing pressure from residents to preserve the characteristics of neighborhoods, especially trees. In 2021, Barrie's zoning bylaw permitted the construction of a maximum of 3 residential units on the property. To address residents' concerns, Ward 1 Councillor Clare Riepma proposed an amendment to limit the height cap of additional residential units to 4.5 meters instead of the 5.5 meters supported by the city's planning staff. He also suggested changes to the setbacks around properties, increasing the minimum exterior side yard setback to 3 meters from 1.5 meters, minimum rear yard setback to 3 meters from 1.2 meters, and minimum interior side yard setback to 3 meters from 1.2 meters. The Council passed the amendment, which will come before the City Council for final approval. Below is the video of the meeting with important timestamps.
We'll now move on to DEV 011-24, the proposed citywide amendment to permit 4 units on residentially zoned lands. That was held by Councillor Riepma. Councillor Riepma, the floor is yours after you put the motion on the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not allowed to put the motion on the floor as printed, and I have an amendment. The amendment is to add the following words to the end of paragraph 1, and it's been handed out. The words are in red, but so that number 1 will read that the proposed city-initiated amendment to zoning bylaw 2009-141 be approved as outlined in Appendix A to Staff Report DEV 011-24, as amended in Table 5292 by changing the maximum height to 4.5 meters, the minimum exterior side yard to 3 meters, the minimum rear yard to 3 meters, and the minimum interior side yard to 3 meters. And I'll be able to speak to that.
The amendment's on the floor, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. For some context on this matter, members will recall that when we went to 3 units per lot, there was a great deal of issue around it in terms of trees being cut down, impacts on all kinds of the surrounding neighbors. And we spent a fair bit of time around this table amending the zoning bylaw at that time to increase the setbacks that we now have. And so as a result of doing that, we had, I think, a lot more success with the accessory units in the 3rd building on the site. And we haven't had, at least in my ward, we haven't had nearly the issues that we had before we amended the bylaw by increasing the setbacks. So this matter that is before us tonight, the bylaw proposes smaller setbacks, again, back to the way it was before we changed the bylaw before. And so I'm expecting we're going to get all the issues that we had then with these when we go to 4 units. So this is an amendment to change the setbacks and the height back to what we had originally for the 3 units. So the height that is proposed in the bylaw is 5.5, which under some circumstances could end up with a 2-story, and I don't think we want that. So the current bylaw is 4.5 meters, and I'm recommending that we keep that. The exterior side yard is proposed to be 1.5 meters. Currently it's 3, and I'm proposing that we stay with that. The minimum rear yard is proposed to be 3 in my amendment. In the proposal, it's 1.5, or is it 1.2? I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, 1.2. My preference would be that it would be 7, but I'm prepared to go to 3, and that the minimum interior side yard be 3 meters. The proposal that is before us is 1.2, and again, I don't think that's enough. So I'm urging members to support this amendment because I think we don't want to go backwards, and I think we really need to make sure that these units fit into our neighborhoods. Yes, we are being pushed by the federal government and by the provincial government to increase the densities, and that's fair enough, and this would permit that still, but I think it's really important to make sure that these units fit into our established neighborhoods.
Thank you. I'm going to go Deputy Mayor Thompson, then I'm going to go Councillor Morales, then I'm going to go Councillor Kunkel.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Just to maybe add something, and I had spoke about it, and I didn't get to the clerk. If Councillor Riepma can take this as a friendly, or would it have to be an amendment to the amendment? And I'll say it, and then you can let me know, Madam Clerk. That I believe that, you know, some councillors are worried about the impact of the neighborhoods and of existing neighborhoods and stuff. So I think that if you look around our city, there's a lot more neighborhoods that will support this based on lot size and, you know, the newer subdivisions opposed to the older. So I know that some actual builders are offering this product in new builds as an investment right away. And speaking with Ms. Panfield this morning, found that out. So what I'm proposing to add to your amendment is that 50% of all of the secondary dwellings be distributed equally throughout the wards, and the remaining 50% be in the annex lands. So it's people will know what they're getting into. It's not changing the new neighborhoods. It's right. So I don't know, Madam Clerk, if that's a friendly to the amendment, or Sergio, the clerk, is saying no. But I'm asking you.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to the Deputy Mayor, it would be an amendment to the amendment. It's not just changing a simple word here or there. It's actually adding words, so it would be an amendment to the amendment.
Perfect. So I won't cloud the discussion around Councillor Riepma's amendment, but they were my intentions, and I'll wait for the appropriate time, but I'll let the conversation occur on the amendment as it is now.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Over to Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. I have some pictures that I sent to the Deputy Clerk, so if we can get IT to put them up. And Jim, hopefully you can see, Councillor Harris, sorry, hopefully you can see these pictures. Okay. So, members of council, for the amendments, I'm hearing, I've seen the emails, I've remembered the topic in October of 2021, November 2021. One of the reasons we're not getting that many pushback on accessory dwelling units, there's actually multiple members of council that told me this, and I found out myself when I asked the industry, is the changes we made in 2021 essentially killed the industry. So we're not getting as much feedback because not as many lot sizes in the city can support ADUs with the setbacks. So I think I'm supportive of what staff have here, and I just, before I go to staff on some questions, I want to share the pictures. So if everybody can look above, and I just literally found these at the start of the meeting, that accessory dwelling unit that you see in front of you has probably the most pronounced setback that I can find, like with a 10-minute search. So I'm going to eyeball that and call it probably 2-meter setback, enough that you can do a raised planter around the ADU, or whatever you want to call it. staff, if we can go to the next picture. With this one, again, I'm just eyeballing it. This probably looks like a 0.6, 0.8. I believe that's the standard that Mississauga staff had originally proposed for their ADUs. When did I watch their council meeting? Yes, I watched their council meeting. This would have been like 8-9 months ago. And it was funny because their council said, whoa, that's way too low. And for them increased it to about 1.2, 1.5, which is what we're coming in at. And staff, if you could go one more. And is there one more after this one? Yep, okay, let's try one more. I'll go back to the garage in a second. Oh, that's it? That's it, okay, perfect. So let's go back one more, return, there we go. So the thing with a closer setback, and maybe not as close as 0.6 members of council, is when you have less of a setback, you, by design, you're not going to allow, as you can see from a picture, people to mingle in that space. You can't put a little pathway, you can't put a little charcoal barbecue, you can't put a little coffee sitting area. So if it truly is about privacy for the interior side yard setbacks on neighboring properties, actually allowing it to be a 1.5, 1.2 prevents a pathway activation of people, which again encourages the privacy to the adjacent fence. That way it allows people, if they're going to hang out in front of the ADU, away from the fence line. My concern, members of council, with a 3-meter setback, keeping what we have right now, is AODA standards for a sidewalk are 1.5. You can make it bigger, but the minimum is 1.5. So if you allow it at 3 meters, you could have a regulation ADA pathway, internal pathway, and you can have a bit of landscaping, a charcoal barbecue, some Muskoka chairs, and now, if the ADU meets all other requirements, you're having that commotion, that talk, that camaraderie right at the fence line of the neighbors. So I actually think having it closer, actually by design, and the picture's worth 1,000 words, prevents people from gathering specifically in that space and actually increases the privacy to the adjoining neighbors. As for the minimum exterior side yard setback, I listened to what my colleague said. There wasn't any feedback as to why the change is being proposed. The exterior side yard setback is really for corner lots. Having 1.5 just really makes better use of the site there. And then finally, the height, and staff, if we could go to the last picture, the garage one, being at 5.5 meters. I just typed in here like granny suite or mother-in-law suite above garage. This, we don't know for a fact. Is there a unit above that garage? There could be. It could be a decommissioned one. It could be not retrofitted. So there's many garages around town in all ends of town, but specifically in Ward 1, 2, 8, and a bit along Big Bay Point and 9 and 10 that have that kind of separate garage where you already have existing structures. No one's building anything new, and it's really above having utilizing the space of an existing structure. Hence why I think 5.5 is appropriate. So based on those comments, members of council, I just want to ask staff, I'll start with Ms. Banfield, could you maybe give your objective planning opinion as to coming in at the proposal, coming in at 5.5, coming in at 1.2, 1.5 in terms of the setbacks?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Morales. So certainly the setbacks that were passed by council in 2021, if you actually go back and look, staff actually at that time had proposed and recommended smaller setbacks in that staff report in 2021, and they were amended through council's decisions. And so ultimately, staff have always had a position that the setbacks should be smaller, and then now when we're actually coming back trying to put another unit, so staff, when it was 3 units, staff thought that the setbacks should be more condensed, and now with 4 units, staff really, the position hasn't changed. We do think that setbacks to actually fit all the units on the property. So, you know, staff always put a recommendation forward based on a professional planning opinion. Sorry, you asked about the height as well, and so the other piece with the height is, you know, having that. It's, in both cases, if there's a shorter principal building, you wouldn't be able to go to the maximum height regardless, but the 5.5 meters would allow for something like the picture, although we don't know exactly how high your picture is. Mm-hmm. There could be a parking space underneath, there could be a loft unit as well, because we are trying to have zoning permissions to permit 4 units, there is a provision that you could have 2 units in the detached structure. So if it's not a parking garage, you could have a lower unit and an upper unit. That's just some of the rationale for the setbacks and then for that increase in height.
Perfect. And the exterior side yard setback? Maybe some quick commentary on that one?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Morales, the exterior side yard setback generally is usually a little bit larger than an interior side yard setback because it's adjacent to a road. We usually have a little bit higher of a setback there to allow for sometimes there's sidewalks, sometimes there's utility boxes, but ultimately, while it might be a little bit larger than, say, an interior side yard, making sure that the setbacks are appropriate, make better use of corner lots, because sometimes you could have kind of a couple units facing one street and a couple units facing the other. So it's really just about looking at provisions that would enable 4 units on properties.
Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Banfield. And members of council, I actually remembered one of the reasons I don't support a lower setback on the exterior. And here's why. Not only is there an exterior side yard setback, there's usually an additional right-of-way. Sometimes it's 1 meter, sometimes it's 2 meters. We're going to go usually with 1.5 meters. So if this amendment is approved, it's going to be at 3 meters plus about 1.5, 4.5 meters. That leaves enough space for an illegally parked car. So people don't like the visual, right? They don't like when cars park on that grassy corner. So this is actually one of the reasons where a 1.5 meter reduced external side yard setback plus a 1 meter right of way doesn't leave enough length of the car. It barely leaves enough width. Usually cars are 2.4 to getting there. So this is actually one of those things where less is more. A less exterior side yard setback will theoretically keep away those improperly parked cars. A less interior side yard setback will keep away the charcoal barbecues, Muskoka chairs, and hanging out that maybe shouldn't happen there to give more privacy to the adjoining neighbors. So this is kind of a interesting discussion, and I thank members of council for their timing and showing the pictures as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kungl.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. I'm supportive of the amendment. I appreciate that being brought forward already, getting emails, and while I do appreciate different interests around what a 4 unit on residentially zoned lands could facilitate being in the East End and going through the process around public feedback around changing setbacks, although further amended by council, I mean, that is something that I feel, at least my residents felt heard, were appreciated, and at least from a step forward feels like, should we be moving forward with this, which is presented, then we're doing so at least to start in the same scope as the intention we set out and changed for the accessory dwelling. So I'm supportive of it, and I guess we can always come back in time, but I also see this as one of many options, not the option around facilitating housing. So I think this is a reasonable step that might be easier for the public to understand, at least, that we're staying consistent with where we voted in the past on accessory dwellings.
Thank you, Councillor Kungl. I now have Councillor Harris.
Great, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Yeah, I will support this as well. I think Councillor Kungl just captured the sentiment as well, that I feel that comes from residents in my area. And I also recognize that the detached accessory dwelling unit is not the answer to the housing crisis. Let's be clear. We had 63 built in the last 5 years. 16 were built last year in Barrie. So it's something that needs to happen, and we have the 3 units per lot right now, and I feel that's reasonable. But definitely, should the 4 units go forward, I think using the standards that we have is prudent and definitely the best way forward. So thank you.
Thank you, and Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. I am very supportive of the amendment. I was very reluctant when I saw the small setbacks that were being proposed, because it does create a whole host of issues. Just a little clarity from staff On page 9 and in a few other places, it actually speaks about the same thing within the staff report in regards to landscape buffer areas. And when it says landscape buffer areas must be provided between the lot line and the accessory building or structure containing an additional residential unit. Now, I know Councillor Morales just a few minutes ago was speaking about a walkway and things like that going between the fence line and the detached accessory dwelling. Would that be what staff would envision as a landscape buffer, a sidewalk? Or like, let's say, even a patio where people would be hanging out?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harvey. So in the zoning bylaw, yes, the landscape buffer area can include shrubbery and plantings, but it can also include patio stones or walkways. That's the definition in the city's zoning bylaw.
Now, in this particular situation, without actually having to amend the whole zoning bylaw, does council have the ability to adjust what a landscape buffer would be solely for these detached accessory dwellings?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harvey, I think staff would have to have an understanding of what you would want to be in the setback. Like normally the setback is, most often it is grass or shrubbery or walkways. I'm not sure what council would want to be in that space.
Just a follow-up then, if I could. So what I'm basically looking at is the same thing when we've had taller structures coming in, whether it's a 4-story, 6-story apartment building, backing onto people's backyards. We've always had discussions around landscaping, type of green screen type of thing, tall trees that would help cover this wall that people that backed onto these properties ahead of a detached accessory dwelling being built probably never envisioned ever coming. And just one way to continue to help keep their privacy, because as we had a discussion earlier, we can't stop windows from being on the rear unless we reduce the setback to less than 1.2 meters, or else we'd be breaching the building code. So that's kind of what I was looking at, is like greenery, some type of shrubbery, tall trees to try and cover, because especially like one of the photos that Councillor Morales showed essentially had a roof that was on an angle, and the tall side was on the bordering side, which basically created a wall at the side of somebody's property that I couldn't imagine that they would have envisioned. So I'm just trying to see where we can get to try and come to a compromise with, we know these things are coming, we can only put the brakes on so much, but trying to make the situation as best as possible for those neighbors that may be impacted by these.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harvey, the key difference in the examples that you're talking about are projects that would go through a site plan approval process and would have the ability for staff to, parks planning staff, to review landscape plans. This is a detached unit really would be just needing a building permit through our building department. So there wouldn't be any step, there wouldn't be any requirement for any city staff person to require plantings when these come up, and a house could be 1.2 meters from a lot line, or a garage could be. So that doesn't change based on kind of what the zoning bylaw says, and it doesn't change, practically speaking, what happens in a side yard setback or a rear yard setback, for the case, as any case may be.
Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you.
Do you mind if I ask a few questions before I have Councillor Riepma and then yourself, Deputy Mayor, if that's good with you? Oh, did I miss someone else? And Councillor Morales as well. Let me make that list, or I might forget what time it is. Through Ms. Banfield, maybe you can answer this, maybe somebody else can. Since we made the changes, and I say we, in being the previous council, to reduce the setbacks, how many applications for these dwelling units have we had?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to you, Mayor Nuttall, to you. So we don't have on average, the easiest way to say it, and since 2019, when we've started taking really good statistics on second suites and detached suites, on average, about 6% of all second suites are detached units. So the majority, so that means 94% of the others, and we're averaging around 200, give or take, per year. So give or take, that's the majority we're still seeing them as second suites in basements. I can share with you certainly that, in 2023, so 2021 and 2022, a lot of the detached units would have been kind of captured in the shift, if you will, in the changing of the provisions. So they might not actually have been constructed till 2022, but they could have been constructed under the old standards. But 2023 is a good number because it's out of the 255 units that we did in 2023, 16 were detached, but 9 out of those 16 needed a minor variance. So just kind of putting that out there from a perspective standpoint. So more than 50% of the detached units approved in 2023 required a minor variance.
So on that, love the stats. So there's about 200 total units that were additional units to an existing property, essentially, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And we made what commitment to the federal government?
We made several commitments to the federal government.
With regards to the fours of right, how many units, sorry, that's my...
Mayor Nuttall, the breakdown of unit counts was around 300 units out of all the units that we're supposed to, over the next 3 years. 300 units should be second suites or third suites or fourth suites. So 300. So we should be okay, given our past track record.
Based on our previous set of standards, we're going to hit this in 18 months, is what I'm hearing. But our funding formula, our funding envelope, if you will, is a 4-year period. I'm going to ask you to hypothesize with me for a second. Of the units that we approved in the past, when it was, call it 3 as of right, or maybe even before that, because I know the provincial government made a change in there. Were there properties that were proceeded on that could have been a higher number of units, could have been 4 units, if we had these set of standards in place that we're talking about today, or is there no difference?
Mayor Nuttall, I mean, every property really is different because it really is, regardless of how many units, there's still, so yes, you can have, so say this gets approved. Yes, you can have 4 units, but you still have to meet the standards of the zoning bylaw. It was really no different with the 3 units. Like, yes, you could have 3 units, but you still had to meet the standards of the zoning bylaw. So again, I mean, I think our historic data is showing that there's not a huge uptake in comparison to, as I said, second suites in a basement. But as I said, the minor variance data from a planning perspective, does show that if, more than 50% of applications are requiring some sort of variation to the standard, that's usually a trigger for planners to say, well, this standard might not necessarily be working. But that's just planning stuff. But
So with regards to then 4 instead of 3, do you anticipate that had the 4 been in place, we would have had a higher number of units than we have today?
Mayor Nuttall, possibly, but I mean, at the end of the day, I think the data shows more that DADU or like detached units aren't super economical to build. Like it's more economical to create a second suite in your existing structure. So potentially, and I think some of the things that council can consider tonight, like having, as I said, 2 units in one one detached building, those types of things. If a third detached unit could have put in a second unit, would they have tried to? Presumably they would have, because they were building the structure to begin with. But it's hard to say.
Okay. In terms of the 4.5 meters high, what is that based on? What is the ground, the bottom of that 4? Where does it start?
Mayor Nuttall, it starts at the ground. We don't have any sort of like average, some zoning bylaws have like average grade or what have you, but it starts at the ground, but it does go, it depends on whether it's a flat roof, it would go to the top of a flat roof, but if it is a peaked roof, it would go to the mid of the peak. So the building roof could actually be higher than 4.5 or 5.5, but it would really depend on the shape of the roof.
And with the 4.5 meters in height, is it reasonable to assume that there could be, if legislated, there could be a basement plus main unit?
Mayor Nuttall, part of the zoning bylaw that's before council this evening would not allow basements in detached units. So obviously you could have a basement in a home, but not in a detached unit. I'm not sure if you could actually design a 4.5 unit building with 2 stories for living space.
Okay. And my final set of questions, if we can imagine a 150-foot lot, a 50 by 150-foot lot, which was a lot of units built in the 90s around that footprint. Have we taken a look to determine whether an accessory building could be built in that type of neighborhood? You know, the homes are 45 feet back and add in the setbacks. Is it possible? Yes or no?
Mayor Nuttall, there are some elements again in the zoning bylaw or proposed anyhow that, that the accessory unit has to be behind the main house. And then there are some limitations from our Barrie Fire that a front door can only, and that's why there's that 40 meters. So again, there are some instances where, if you put it all together, even though you could have 4 units, you can't because there's other things at play.
Okay. Okay. Councillor Riepma.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Just a couple of things that I just wanted to reinforce, and that is we had no end of issues, and Councillor Harris will attest to that. We had no end of issues before we changed those setbacks, and I think that many of those issues have been resolved as a result of the setbacks that we did impose. And so I'm very reluctant to go back to opening up a situation where we might end up with all of those issues all over again. And that's why I'm encouraging these modifications. I think I agree with Ms. Banfield that every lot is unique and the situation is unique, and yep, some will work and some won't. And I'm not sure that this materially changes that too much. I think it's really important that, especially in our established neighborhoods, that we have a really good fit between the new building and the existing neighborhood. And I think the pictures speak for themselves. If you were the neighbor and you had a wall beside you like that was shown in the picture, or you had a high second story with windows overlooking your backyard, that doesn't seem to me to be a good fit. And I think that this attempts to get to the fit. I think as well, Ms. Banfield's comment that a number of the applications went to Committee of Adjustment, I think that's probably a good thing, simply because that allows some flexibility for unique situations. And so I've had that in Ward 1 a number of times, and I think that the Committee of Adjustment process actually makes it better. And so I'm not unhappy with that.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. It's more of a question of clarity, so through you to Ms. Banfield. You made a comment on the side setback about that the reduced setbacks were a good planning and stuff. So for the auxiliary lots, we have 1.2. If I was to buy a vacant lot and build a duplex, would it be permitted to have a 1.2 meter setback from a new build?
Mayor Nuttall, through you to Deputy Mayor Thompson. It depends on the zone. It may well be able to have a 1.2 or 1.5 meter side yard setback depending on the residential zone. Yes.
Okay. What is the zoning? Isn't 5 meter side yard required on residential zoning? Like on a I guess a corner lot is it 5 meters? I'm just trying to.
Mayor Nuttall, through you to the Deputy Mayor. As I said, every zone, so that like all the residential zones do, for example, like the R1 zone does have a 1.2 meter setback. RM2, which sometimes has like more like the fourplexes or what have you, has 1.8. And then the exterior side yard in most of our residential zones, so the ones abutting a road, is 3 meters. So obviously, if you're putting houses together, like the spaces combined to make bigger gaps between multiple houses, but ultimately these standards are, and then some of the apartment zones, some of the higher rise zones, and certainly some of the projects that we're seeing that come to council, for example, do have a 5 meter setback, but the buildings are much higher. The idea of the setback really is kind of the taller the building, usually the bigger the side yard setback. But in residential neighborhoods, again, you're looking at, in some cases now, suggesting the detached units are going to have a larger setback, side yard setback, than a detached home would.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. What we discussed this morning in regards to builders offering this as a product that they can buy and stuff, would we, if we approve this, whatever the setbacks are and stuff like that, whatever council feels, would there need to be a change in any other policy to allow that? Like,
through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Deputy Mayor Thompson. So when the secondary plan areas were first getting approved and developed, the council and the planning directors of the day made it that in their approvals that they had to include the option to build a second suite. Again, this was like not yesterday, so build that basement unit when you're building the main house. Then when the changes came to allow 3 units, then that change happened as well with the builders. So some builders are offering 2 units in the main house and the ability to right from the get-go have that detached unit. I would suspect if council permits 4 units, the builders would try to make that work if it's permitted. The dichotomy is that a lot of the units in the secondary plan areas, the lots just aren't quite as big. So I'm not really sure if they would fit, if you will, kind of thing. And they would then have to change kind of the zoning on their properties if they didn't fit and they wanted to do that.
so if it was feasible on the lot size, there's nothing we need to do to the industry would figure it out on their own just by the steps taken in the past.
Mayor Nuttall, through you to the Deputy Mayor, I would suspect they would, absolutely.
Perfect. So, just maybe a comment. This is a tough issue for everybody, and I think there's some fear of the unknown as well. We don't know what the uptake will be and everything like that. But I think as council, we're trying to do everything that we can to mitigate, the existing residents, the 20-year taxpayer that bought into a neighborhood with a certain expectation and, to live in a certain way. And I know it's a balancing act, but, and you can spin everything, less space at the side stops gatherings. Well, drive around the neighborhoods when you have like 1 meter at the side. It normally stores garbage bins, bikes, your hose, the wheelbarrow, the snow blower that you don't use, right? So it becomes, there's a negative side or a positive side. But I think we're trying to find a balance to achieve everything. We understand that, we need stock in the housing market of all kinds, But I also don't think members of council want to walk around their neighborhoods that, you know, they're here to represent the people and change the whole fabric of a neighborhood. So I will be supporting the amendments.
If I can just pick up where Deputy Mayor was there, with regards to the annexation area, the two secondary plans, largely unbuilt, although I drove in last week and was shocked. Our members of council, or I guess I'll direct this to the mover of the amendment, to Councillor Riepma, is there a reason you would want the same setbacks inside of unbuilt areas as built areas?
I think that depends a little bit on the character of the unbuilt area.
Sorry, I apologize. And I know I'm interrupting. If you go across the south end, I mean, it's a pretty uniform set of circumstances. Former farm fields, some forests, some roads that need to be in better condition. That's what I'm talking about. Is there, for you, a reason there would be a difference in Councillor Harvey's Ward 7 annexation area versus Councillor Morales' Ward 9 annexation area, and then those versus the existing boundary as well?
It's a good question. I don't really know the answer to that. I would think that if people that are living there with the expectation that there could be or would be 4 units on the neighboring property, and they knew that the setbacks were whatever the setbacks were, then I think, you know, that would be fair. I think as long as people have that knowledge when they acquire their property. I think it's a different situation where the rules change while they're owning. Is that?
And yeah, and I guess that's kind of what I was trying to get at, is that if somebody's, you know, the majority of these homes, I'm guessing, are being purchased by folks in the GTA, right? And they're moving from postage stamps to postage stamps that might be a little bit bigger, but they're still small compared to what traditionally Barrie did in the 90s and 2000s. So is there an opportunity to say, okay, within the Hewitt's secondary plan and within the Salem secondary plan, I guess this question is actually from Ms. Banfield, to have the setbacks that are being proposed by staff instituted there, but not instituted throughout the rest of the city, where there's an expectation based on a council commitment 2 years ago or 3 years ago or whatever it was for, and I'll just use one of them, a 3-meter setback instead of a 1.2. Is there an opportunity to slice unbuilt areas off versus built up areas?
Mayor Nuttall, I believe that there would be. If you're not asking me to do it right this second, but I think that staff could definitely take that away and come up with a way to have standards similar to, I think there's absolutely a way to do it. I just would need to think about it.
And I'm sorry, I'm going off of the cuff here, so I'm just trying to balance a couple of things. And Councillor Morales, I have you next, and then I've got Councillor Harvey. But, you know, I was speaking with Minister Fraser today about this, and I always think that the best policy is to be upfront and honest about where we're at, right? And so we had the conversation via text, a quick one, but a good one, in the sense that what are the expectations from the federal government? Because the reason this is all coming about is because the federal government is saying that we expect this anywhere we're providing funding. And anyone who thinks that this is tied strictly to the housing funding is wrong. The minister spoke very directly in Toronto at the, not the Albany Club, what's the other one called? The Empire Club, where he said, we're looking at tying all federal funding to 4 units as of right. And that's gas tax, that's all the things we live on as a municipality when they dangle the carrots in front of us so we can reduce the tax load on our municipality. So his response was, look, we obviously want it as broad as possible, and I'm now going on Alex speak instead of minister speak. But it's really important that we include downtowns and we include transit areas, transit, what do we call them? Transit nodes, yes, those. You're thinking, or I wish I could say what you're thinking. So, you know, I think it's important as we're looking at this, we have to do something that fits Barrie, right? It's got to be something that fits the fabric of our community, yet accomplishes the things that we've committed to inside of the signed documents with my signature to the federal government. And so, you know, as I look at it, I look at opportunity in downtown, I look at opportunity around transit hubs, and I see large opportunity on unbuilt areas. And that could be outside of the annexation area. I'm going to be really, really honest with folks. Like, that could be outside of the annexation area in the sense that if somebody has a 60-foot by 120-foot lot, there's an easy potential for them to build from scratch something that would allow for units even under the improved setbacks that are being proposed. And so we need to be honest about that. We need to be upfront about that. But I think the annexation area as a whole, if we change the expectations for when somebody is purchasing inside of Barrie into this area so that they know when they're purchasing that these are the standards, these are the setbacks, I think that we can be more loose there and come up with more units by doing so. So I don't have an amendment because I can't do amendments, but at some point I'd love that amendment. We also need to look at downtown and transit hubs, which is not going to make Councillor Harris or Councillor Nixon incredibly happy. But I'm just relaying, I think everyone should be working on the same information with regards to what was coming down. My final question on the fourplexes is this. Is there an opportunity for condominiumization of these units?
Mayor Nuttall, I don't believe so. The idea is 4 units per lot, and then when you start looking at either severing or condominiumizing them, they actually create different units, and then they wouldn't meet the lot area and they wouldn't meet the lot size, and so it's 4 units on one lot.
So I heard today, and I think the deputy mayor got it from you, so I'm just going to go to the source here. I heard today there was a 4-unit inside of the annexation area potential of $1.5 million or something like that. Not in the annexation area, on a new lot for $1.5 million.
Mayor Nuttall, that was for 3 units.
For 3 units, okay. And those 3 units, so that's an average $500,000 per unit. Do we know what the bedrooms were in each one?
Mayor Nuttall, I do not.
Okay. So I just want to leave this on the floor. I'm not even sure if this can be had as part of this conversation, to be honest with you, but it strikes me that there's not many projects in the city where we're looking at $500,000 2 or 3 bedroom units. But there's potential through this that you could. And, you know, I understand that there's complexity. Well, you know, you've got one roof, but you've got, you know, if you think about 2 units on top of 2 units, you got one roof, and what happens if someone's not paying, and all of those types of things are the same issues you deal with in any condominiumized setting. And I think that we're limiting the ability of people to purchase if we don't allow the cheapest form of building to be purchased. And I don't know how to incorporate that necessarily tonight, and I think it's probably a side conversation, Ms. Mayfield, to have with you and legal. But I do want to make everyone aware that if this goes through, that is something that I will be looking for. Not to say that we want to take away rental units, but to say that it needs to be both. I mean, we'll need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And I think that that will open up a lot more for young people and for parents around the city who are looking at this. Councillor Morales, I'm going to go to you, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Harvey, and then Councillor Corser, and then I'm going to go back to Councillor Riepma. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Just watch the only quote from tonight be, "We need to chew gum and walk at the same time." I'm going to go off one of the last points you said. We need to get the cheapest units we can that are the easiest to build and get on in the pipeline. Cheapest as in cost of construction. And in my understanding of this, that's the ones above the existing garage. Garages that are already there that may not be exactly that height or maybe with that countryside background, but there's lots of them on Big Bay Point, in Ward 9s, and as we keep going. And that is why I really emphasize keep it at 5.5. I understand there might be interest to do it. So maybe, and I love this discussion, by the way, the tone is much better than it was in 2021. For those who, there we go. Mr. Councillor Riepma, right? The tone was much better among everybody, myself included. So this is great and it's constructive. So maybe let's support some sections of the amendments and some not other sections. So I strongly feel no, I almost dare to say no, that 4.5 will take off those low-hanging fruit, those easy ground rule singles will take off those garages above that would have otherwise been built, and we'll say, well, those are not going to happen, so I'm going to throw my $30,000 to the Committee of Adjustment, hire a planner, and go hard. And we're going to get the issues that we've had. We just need to check our emails in the last couple of weeks to know that. So the garages are a big deal. As to the other points you made, Mayor Nuttall, I don't think the idea about having these units in the annex lands is going to work, and I have evidence to that. And Deputy Mayor Thompson will have this. You also have this. So do you remember when we met the president of Honeyfield Communities at the meet and greet, and he said, "I have an issue with the proposed zoning bylaw changes," and we said, "Send it, Sergio, deal with him, get him to send us the feedback, get it in writing." So we did get an email, and Deputy Mayor Thompson, you were also CC'd on this. I only bring it up because you were CC'd. So on Monday, January 29th at 12:07 p.m., so for Mr. Chappelle, he'll also have access to this. It's a long email, and it's from the president. This is someone who owns basically all the developable land that homes are popping up as we speak and for the next 4 years. And one of the paragraphs here he says is, implementing any new zoning standard for the secondary plans will only serve to restrict the supply of housing and increase housing costs. The proposed zoning, if implemented, will require a fundamental redo of all of our newly completed plans and home designs, which require almost 5 years to develop. Going back to the drawing board would be an immensely expensive and time-consuming undertaking that will only handicap our ability to bring much-needed supply of affordable, market-driven housing that consumers would be able to and willing to buy. He drilled this into me when we spoke many times on the phone. He is not going back to the drawing board. And so I just want to be clear to anyone. I'm sorry that it's a bit of a downer comment. The expectation that the annex lands, people know what they're buying, the developers can maybe sell a unit at a little bit more premium because it's got some renting units, it's not going to happen. And I tried, and we got that in writing, and that's been submitted. Now, that was for the proposed zoning bylaw, which is a different document. However, it relates to this. If there's any expectations that the lands that are going to get in the pipeline over the next 8 years are going to take this on, they have strongly said no, like they will not do it. So unless we can force them to, they will not take an incentive, they won't take a carrot, they won't take a DC discount. As a result, I want to go for the low-hanging fruit. That includes the garages, and I don't want those illegally parked cars with the setbacks, with the exterior side yard setback. And let me just check my notes here. As per the answers that Deputy Mayor Thompson got from Ms. Banfield earlier, it was an excellent question. The question being, what's the side yard standards for single attached homes? 1.2, 1.5, 1.8, depending the zoning area. It was an excellent question because if this amendment passes, it would actually create a bigger setback requirement for an ADU than for the existing dwelling, which is kind of an interesting dichotomy. I'm not saying it should be less, but definitely having the new units have a higher setback standard than the ADU is kind of an interesting situation. Also, finally, when we heard from staff saying that about 50% of our ADUs have had to come in for a Committee of Adjustment variance, I think that goes to show that the zoning standards are clearly not addressing the market applications. 50% people asking for an exemption is like 50% of people handing an assignment in late. Something happened. So if the number was lower, I think it would just say, people, that is the market. But I think we have an opportunity, because it's been roughly 2 years and 4 months, to address it at this point, especially since the housing crisis has only gotten worse since 2021. So as a result, I'm actually going to do an amendment to the amendment. I really hope it passes, because I'm trying to be a little bit more sensible on everything everybody has said, and then we'll go from there. And I'm going to email it out. But basically, my amendment to the amendment is to delete the proposed changes, keep the 5.5 on the height, and actually increase the setback from the staff proposal of 1.2 on the side yard to 1.5, keep the exterior at 1.5, and increase the rear yard setback from 1.2 to 1.5. Essentially, I want to make a universal 1.5. And I can speak to the amendment or not. No, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I think a universal side yard setback is effective. I really, as some other members alluded to, you can have rocks and walkways as part of the landscape buffer. And I know that I didn't deal with this as much as Councillor Harris and Councillor Riepma. I totally tip my hat to you two. But if we know that the possibility exists for people to put Muskoka chairs, a charcoal barbecue, things that encourage people to congregate in 3 meters, the answer is they likely will. So I think accepting a 1.5 meter universal setback is that happy medium where it actually, almost just by the design purpose, eliminates or at the very least strongly discourages anybody to have that congregation. Because remember, with gathering comes noise. We have Bluetooth speakers now. We have other sources of noise. So if at the end of the day, if 1.5 is only good enough for a little bit of shrub and the waste bins, I think the fences have to be at least 1.5 meter in height. So the waste bins aren't going to be visible from the adjoining property. So I'll send an amendment around and I guess open up for discussion. And I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, so the amendment's on the floor. Councillor, a couple of things. With regards to the comments from Honeyfield, I don't think I've read them recently, so I'm not going to say what they said that day or not. But I think we have the CAO in the electronically joining us. Mr. CAO, you and I and Ms. Banfield, and I think Ms. McAlpine, maybe, met with the development community, a few weeks ago. There were probably 15 to 20 developers representing, I'm guessing, 80% of the ownership of developable lands in the city of Barrie. I could be wrong, but I thought I heard 2 things, including about the new zoning bylaw. One was speed of process to get units to market, in the sense that once they're approved, getting through building services, permit pulled, and being able to actually build. And the second one was less stringent setbacks that are being set out in the new zoning bylaw. Can you confirm that that's what we heard from that meeting? I think it was actually specifically from Honeyfield, who was on who joined us electronically that day.
Mayor Nuttall, to you and members of committee, we did indeed have a meeting with the development and building community. I don't recall off the top of my head, Mayor Nuttall, whether Honeyfield was on the line, but it certainly was all of the active builders and developers in Barrie. And certainly overwhelmingly, their number one was request when asked if we could invest more money in the system, where would we invest it? They requested that we ensure that we have adequate staffing to move processes and applications through as quickly as possible. That was almost a unanimous request. There was various requests, including around opportunities around the zoning bylaw, for sure.
And those...
I don't remember specifically a setback commentary, Mayor Nuttall, but that may simply be because my memory is not working.
Yeah, I believe that the concern was related to some of the more stringent parts of the new zoning bylaw being proposed, including but not limited to the setbacks. So I think Honeyfield's doing a bunch of development. There's no question, Councillor Morales, but they're not the only show in town. There's many, many, many developers that I think haven't started their process, that will start their process as the market right sizes here, and haven't developed out all of their all of their stock. So, you know, some of them haven't even gone to market. Some of them haven't even been filed with us. There's lots of opportunity between now and then. And if they say that we don't want, that we prefer higher setbacks, I will stand to be corrected, but I don't think they will. I think they'll actually say, this gives us more opportunities, and if it fits, we'll look at it. If it doesn't, we're too far down the road, then we won't. Sure.
Very quickly, Mayor Nuttall. I agree they're not the only person in town. When I talk about the pipeline, there's lands that are going to be developed in Ward 7, but those lands are like, some of them are now, and some of them are phase 2, phase 3. I know we're maybe getting rid of phases. It's going to be like 10, 15 years. The Ward 9, 10 ones are like the now / to 8 years. And beyond Honeyfield, I know some of Ray Duhamel's clients that he has told me on behalf of his clients, they're done. Sobeys, do you remember the whole plaza and me with the driveways? They're done. They've done their designs. They're not redoing the designs. They got it in a settlement. I've tried to push a lot of this because I like pedestrian safety, because I've done a lot of these initiatives, and they're like, we're not doing it. So I understand Honeyfield is not the center of the universe for this policy, and neither is Ward 9. But because a lot of the lands that are going to be in the pipeline, we could review this in 3 years. But so my runway is 0 to 4 years. A lot of it is going to happen there, and I think every single major landholder has said we're not going to. We don't like the revision of this zoning. We've spent 5 years and lots of engineering money, and our investors refuse to accommodate this. So maybe by next week, what I could do is, instead of us speculating, get you that confirmation of people who have given me firm no's versus people who have said undetermined, and maybe that might help the discussion.
Yeah, I think perhaps Ms. Banfield, before City Council, if you could send an email out to that same group of developers and ask them whether in the annexation areas in the Salem and the Hewitts Creek, what is it called, the landowners group or something like that, whether they prefer to have setbacks of a higher degree or a lower degree, and they can get back to us on whether they want to keep, whether they want to fall in line with the rest of the city at 3 meters, or if they would like to in fact be at 1.2.
Absolutely, Mayor Nuttall.
Thank you. And then we'll get all of the information back on that we need.
Yeah, as long as the information is presented in the goal of building ADUs or more units.
Sure, absolutely. Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Actually, just to stay on the same line that you're on right now, even with the 1.2, like I look at a house that I used to live in another municipality, and one side of the house was actually built on the lot line. So you literally had a 0 setback on the one side, and be quite honest with you, it was a non-issue. So that might even be something to consider. But to Councillor Morales's point, I really agree with the take that you've got on it, Mayor Nuttall, because certain developers are already far enough along into their phases. Obviously, the Hewitt side is much further along than the Salem side. Like, I mean, my phase 1 is already done. I'm not sure how far they are into phase 2, but definitely phase 3 and 4 are pretty much a blank canvas, even though they've kind of got the particulars as to what they envision. Now, obviously, that could change as the demand changes for probably smaller units, so that way you can build them a little bit cheaper and make them more affordable. But the whole idea around having different rules in the annex lands than the built boundary makes total sense, especially when you're talking about detached auxiliary dwellings, because then people should know what they're buying into and would be accepting of that, and there would be no surprises to them. And whereas those that have lived in a house for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, obviously their take on it's going to be very different. And that's where I think there is definitely opportunity, and I know the Deputy Mayor spoke about an amendment that's going to be coming forward. And like we're only having to deal with 680 units that's tied to this federal funding. And it doesn't have to be 680 detached dwellings either. It just needs to be 680 dwelling units. So it's a very attainable number, just so that way people don't kind of get frenzied that we're going to have 680 coach houses in backyards or side yards, because that's not where this is going. Do I agree with the current amendment on the floor? Definitely not. I think those setbacks are just still too low and too close. And then on the other aspect, when it comes to the height, too high. Now, when it comes to, because Councillor Morales has mentioned it a few times about the garages. Well, if there's already an existing garage that's at whatever height it's at, and they've got the ability to put a secondary dwelling in the upper portion of that, then that's not an issue. There hasn't been anything that's changed on that property. So I don't know how this would tie in, what's being proposed in the staff report would really tie into that. Now, Ms. Banfield can correct me if I'm wrong, because the way I look at it as a councillor and as a resident is the height of that detached garage isn't changing. It's just now you're adding an upper level suite into that garage. So how, if maybe Ms. Banfield, if you can advise if how this ties in, or in my opinion, I don't see that it really does directly tie in and would impact the heights that are tied to the amendments on the floor.
Mayor Nuttall, through you to Councillor Harvey. So a couple of things are at play. So right now, a detached garage can only be 4 meters in height. So unless there was a site-specific provision or a minor variance, we wouldn't have existing legally created 5.5 meter. So there shouldn't be too many of them out there. There may be some, and people are probably sitting, I've got one, or so there's many different ways that they could be, but generally speaking, there shouldn't be tons of them around. But even if there were, you would still need to go through a minor variance if you didn't meet the standards. So if we have standards in here and you don't meet the standards, you would still need to go through a minor variance. And I know that, we certainly heard from councillors saying, well, that's not the end of the world. The neighbors then get notified and signs go on the property and we have a meeting, and that's what the Committee of Adjustment is for. And 100% that is what they're for. But at the end of the day, also zoning reform is to actually take away planning approvals. It's generally speaking, it's to go for so many projects to be able to go just to building permit. Committee of Adjustment is a great process. It's certainly faster than a rezoning, but it still takes time. And the whole idea of some of these initiatives is really to have people just be able to apply for a building permit.
Great. I do appreciate your answer. I am a fan of the Committee of Adjustments, unfortunately, because I look at where we were in 2020, 2021, where it was basically a free-for-all. And people were up in arms, especially in Ward 1, 2, and 8, where they do have the large lots, that they were taking chainsaws to roots and from the bordering trees and everything else, and like we were having significantly sized townhouses, I would say, put in the backyards of some of these properties. And I really felt for people that never ever would have expected that all of a sudden you're sitting in your backyard and you're staring at a townhouse. So I think that's why we had to do what we did in 2021, and I think that's why we're having this very fulsome discussion again tonight, and hopefully we come to some type of agreement as to what these setbacks are going to be, or we might be at another a long meeting again next week too. But I do appreciate, I really think you're trying to get us to where we need to be with having some balance, and the annex lands is, and I represent that area. That's really where we need to really be pushing our density levels, because it'll save us a lot of headaches and it'll save our residents a lot of headaches, because when you know you're buying into that, it's not an issue, or it shouldn't be. I guess I'll leave my comments at that. I guess we can deal with Councillor Morales' amendment, because even something as simple as Councillor Riepma at a later date, depending on what happens with Councillor Morales' amendment, that even adding the words within the built boundary at the end of his original amendment would probably serve the purposes of what you just had mentioned, and then that way the rest of what's contained within the staff report would obviously be for the Salem and Hewitts, and then our amendment would be within the built boundary. So I'll leave my comments at that.
Thank you. Is that a friendly there, Councillor?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I think, are we not discussing Councillor Morales's
You're getting good at this.
Since I have the floor, I might as well keep it, right? I thought your idea was brilliant, that maybe we should have different setbacks in the annexed areas versus the built boundary. And maybe, you know, we have just come to a resolution of this matter if we can have Councillor Morales's amendment withdrawn, and I would happily accept Councillor Harvey's friendly then, and have my amendment apply only to the built boundary. I think that may just solve the whole problem, but that's sort of where I'm at.
I think that if I'm guessing that Councillor Morales will want to keep his amendment on the floor, but I'm going to.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. And so I think that we got to do that in full. The other piece I would just outline is what I've already outlined. And Councillor Harris, I hate putting you on the spot, and Councillor Nixon as well, and Councillor Morales, because the three of you have transit and downtown. What is the perspective around the reduced setbacks in the downtown area, and around the transit terminals? And so I'll start with whoever wants to answer first, because it is something that's been requested by the federal government. Sorry, Jim, your hand's up. Your fake hand, not your real one.
Yeah, I'll go. Thanks, Mayor Nuttall. Thanks for that consideration for those areas. I think for me, the bigger wins around those transit hubs where we are understanding there's a responsibility for density are the infill projects and the new projects. And I think if we do a look at some of the recent proposals that have come in those areas, they're new, they're significant, they're high, and they are meeting, well exceeding the density that generally is in those areas. So I think for that community, and as we try to be part of the solution and not just, be opposed to change, that's the big change that they're experiencing. And there's lots of expectation. We've even seen when we had the open house on the official plan, some interesting efforts to build out that block around Cumberland and Gowan. And so I think, again, when I look at the numbers and look at the big picture, the adding units to the backyard doesn't move the needle. What moves the needle is the height and the density on the infill and on the new projects that are being proposed. So for the people of primarily that area, there are some, I imagine a fair percentage of detached accessory dwelling units are in that area because there are some lots that permit it. So I think, that's understood. It's part of that community. So definitely the setbacks that were provided in 2021 have been well received. And I think, and looking at the numbers, and we see the total second suite units, the big issue, the big number is the unit in the main dwelling. That's where we can really make the biggest impact. Last year, 94% of those units were in the main dwelling, not the detached accessory dwelling unit. So I think that's where we're going to make those units. And as we make that easier, then you'll see the number. And the numbers are, very clear that that's where the growth happens. So I think for people in that community, understanding secondary units in the main dwelling, having a reasonable detached dwelling in the back with the current standards is understood. But going backwards to where we were in 2020 is not preferred. So I think that's so I do like, again, where Councillor Riepma has kept us with the using the amended setbacks that were done in 2021.
Okay, thank you. Councillors Nixon and Morales. I see a light over there, so we'll go over there. Councillor Nixon.
Yes, thank you through you, Mayor Nuttall. Yeah, I agree with what Councillor Harris just said, and it's pretty much the same. Any comments I get regarding density concerns are more with the towers and with the increase of the thousands of residents that will be coming in future years. Yeah, I think that it's not so much downtown, it's more in the northern part of the ward. I think I have gotten very few calls, to be honest with you, and those that I have, it's not so much about they don't seem to have a problem with the setbacks at higher setbacks, and I don't think that's a big issue. We're not looking at the fact that they can be spread out, and I agree with the fact that if you're buying a property and you know what the rules are, and you know what could happen, you're gonna deal with it a lot easier than you are after being in a house for 20 years and having some changes. So yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that, and and that's it. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nixon. Councillor Morales.
Mayor Nuttall, yes, I support lower setbacks in my ward, specifically around the transit area and the annex lands. The reason I support it is I asked myself this question because I know this issue is very sensitive with some people. If people don't want to vote for me because of that, that's fine. In 10 years, 20 years, when somebody asks me, did you do everything you could possibly do, no matter how small? And absolutely agree, we're not going to solve the housing crisis with coach houses. But did you do every single thing possible to ensure that people can stay in Barrie when they retire, to grow up in the city they want to? I want to be able to look them in the eye and say, yes, I did. So that's why I'm supportive of this. Now, that said, if clerks can throw up the last picture I sent, I personally, and I say this respectfully, have a bit of an issue of having a different standard, and here's why. I know this was approved a bit ago, and I know then it was unratified and it's up in the air, but if staff could show quickly the picture that I just sent. This is why I have an issue with two standards in terms of zoning bylaws. Yeah. The dramatic pause is not on purpose. There we go. So, members of council, if we'll look at the title page, the very first page of the document, again, unratified, that we, as a council, as a city, had adopted, was one city, one vision, one plan. The very first sentiment, the very first sentence, to communicate to people, there is a culture in the north and culture in the south. There are two distinct communities. I grew up in the north, represent the south, moved to the south, moved back up to the north, and we all have our own stories. That is the very first message that we sent. And this approach, if approved, would deviate away from that. That's a tough one for me. I've mentioned this one to planning staff in the past. I've been sitting on an opportunity to say this line for a bit, and not trying to be dramatic or negative. That's not how you win people over, their hearts and their minds, and I'm well aware of where the votes are right now. The short answer is yes, I'm willing to put that up for Ward 9 and put my money where my mouth is. But also, having two different standards of that is tough. There's many people who live in Old Barrie who moved there 5 years ago. And I think that my amendment is prudent because, again, going back to that, 3 meters will create areas of congregation. That is not good for the people who want privacy. And I'm almost doing that out of respect for the people who want more privacy. Reducing it to 1.5 is sensible. It follows staff recommendations. It follows best practices of other cities who have been dealing with these units, specifically Mississauga, who, by the way, they might be GTA. They're pretty resistant to change, especially with housing. So they've gone through the trenches on this. 1.5 is more than sensible on the side ones. Based on the great question from Councillor Harvey to Ms. Banfield, I actually would, you know what, I'll do it myself on a friendly to make this amendment more palatable. I'll also amend it to reduce it to 4.5. I think the answer you got was there's not many out there that are more than 4. So I want to show council that I'm truly listening and not make this a all or nothing amendment. So I would also just add to that, a friendly to my own, that the 5.5 be reduced to 4.5. So sticking with Councillor Riepma's, the only difference really is I guess I would push for a universal 1.5, not to cram more units, not to make them bigger or more intrusive, but to get rid of that congregation space and any possibly intrusive parking on corner lots. And also so we don't contravene the very first sentence in our adopted unratified official plan.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. So I was done talking and stuff, and then when I seen that page, it's like the one vision one, you know, I hope members of council who realize that when we vote on like South End rec centers and stuff, when I have Ward 5 residents that have no rec center, no library, so there's different standards that everybody, I don't think that statement is that we do different things in different, I think it means one city, you know, one vision and stuff. It was so catchy, I forgot what it was, but to be honest, so what I'm saying is I think we invite everybody here, and we've got a plan, and we're going to all represent, we're all in different parts of the ward, but I think, and I know that this was in 2012, I think Council of the Day changed the zoning because there was a promise school in the subdivision I live where people paid premiums to back onto the school. And I think planning changed that they double zone school sites so people know what they're buying. I believe that was 2012. It could be off by a couple. It might even been 2010. But so we do have different standards of planning and multiple use planning but I feel that when I speak to residents today, they may have not bought that lot in premium if they know that there was an opportunity when they were told 100% there was a school there. So I believe the information to the buyer telling them this is exactly what could happen beside you. You know, and I believe coming from the GTA, having people close, and you know, reducing the side yard setback to reduce congregating and stuff, because you have a house in your backyard, they're going to be in their backyard, or in their front yard, which is in your backyard. They're congregating, like whether it's at the side of your house or at the front of their house, they're in your backyard now. So I think I think staff and council have worked to try to get somewhere that's palatable to move forward and achieve what we're looking at. And I think Mayor Nuttall has set out a great path forward to have the two areas, you know, and, you know, the comment where half of the units went to the Committee of Adjustments, they didn't require, they requested. It wasn't a requirement, it was a request. So, you know, builders always request more. That's just, you know, and I understand it has to be a profitable venture for them all. Like, you know, profit's not a bad word. That's what makes the world go round. But, you know, just so we don't get lost in, it was a request, not a requirement. So I won't be supporting the amendment. I will be supporting the original one.
So just before we go to anyone else, Councillor Harvey, if I can just summarize what I heard with regards to the transit in downtown. So essentially, I think from what I heard from Councillor Harris was with regards to it kind of almost being an underzoning, that the lands specifically across the street from Allendale, if we can go to the presentation during the OP open house, was for I think a very large building. I can't remember the number of units or the number of stories. It might have been 20 or 25 stories across the street there. I believe there's a plan in on the old co-op in the 30-ish stories. Behind that on Jacob, there's 20 to 25 stories. Behind that at the fairgrounds, there's 40 stories. So I hear you, Councillor, and I can go back to the minister with that. I think that is actually some context we can go back with. With the downtown, I mean, I heard you. I'm not sure there's many opportunities downtown. Maybe Toronto Street, by the McDonald's and that area, but most of the proposals we're hearing are very similar, right? They're, in fact, Mr. Silverberg is building a building there. I think it's large. It's bigger than 4 units. We know that. So I hear you there. Over Councillor Morales across the street, we sent the item for Schlegel Homes in a Chia, and I can't recall the size of that. You can
6, 12, 18, 23.
And so it would almost be an underzoning there too. I'm not sure what's being built right beside the transit terminal. You'll have to, you'll know that more than me.
Currently 8, and I've tried to get our mail to at least come in at where Burlington has around their GO station, which is like 1832.
Okay, and it's currently 8 stories?
Yeah, unbuilt back in 2016-17.
So I'm looking at the transit hubs, and I actually think it doesn't make sense to go 4 units as of right. And we can explain that to the feds, and I'll send that off to the minister, including the supporting information, just so we're all on the same page. So thank you for the feedback. I thought it was important that we had that conversation. With regards to the amendment now on the floor, is there any other? Sorry, Councillor, I took your spot there.
It's all good. You got first dibs on me anytime, especially when you're chairing the meeting. I still won't support it. And I have difficulty in having a slogan thrown at me and trying to really stretch that slogan to bend it in a certain way that I'm not quite sure it was ever meant to be taken. We're still one city regardless. We've got many different varying communities from south to north to east to west. That's a good thing. No different than you go to Toronto. Look at all the various communities that are within that huge city. That's a good thing. We'd be pretty darn boring if everything was the same throughout a city, especially of our size. And just like when Hewitt's and Salem's going to get built out and completed, it's going to be another complement to the other areas that we have. We're still all one city, so I really have difficulty in that slogan being thrown out at us and almost trying to pressure us into something and spinning it. In the end, we have to pivot as things change. Market conditions are constantly changing. Obviously, different grants and different things are coming up, and we have to change with that. And when you want to talk about slogans, we remove banners from the bases of our signs out on the 400 for a reason too. Sometimes the slogan works, sometimes it doesn't. And that's where I just have a great difficulty that we're starting to now try and spin things with a slogan to guilt people into voting one way or another. But I'll just leave my comments at that, but I think it's a good thing that our city has got various pockets and communities throughout the city and that it doesn't look the same from one end to the other.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this? Seeing none. So I'll call the vote on the amendment to the amendment. All those in favor? All those opposed? And it doesn't carry. So now we're back on Councillor Riepma's amendment, which I believe there was a request for either an amendment or a friendly based on, I believe, Councillor Harvey earlier.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Councillor Corser. So before Councillor Riepma answers that question, right now, the amendment from Councillor Riepma, which would increase the setbacks from what's being proposed by staff back to what the current setbacks are today, that's on the floor. Okay. Floor is yours, and I apologize if I've missed you for the last little while.
Because I wasn't. Yeah, I was like, am I still on the list to speak? I wasn't sure there because I was trying to be patient. I'm not a very patient person. So I'm going to hold off and wait until after this vote, and then I'd like to speak.
You'd like to speak to the main motion?
Yes.
Essentially? Okay. Thank you. So, Councillor Riepma?
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. I think your suggestion has a lot of merit, and that the annexed areas probably should be treated somewhat differently than the built boundary. So I'm going to accept Councillor Harvey's friendly to add to my amendment within the built boundary, so that the effect of that is that we would have the larger setbacks within the built boundary, and the setbacks as recommended in the report in the annexed areas.
Thank you for that. So that's now on the floor, that the setbacks be adopted for the existing city, the built boundary. There's nothing on the floor with regards to the annexation area, but before anyone jumps in to do that amendment, did you want to wait till the vote's done on? Okay, so you want to speak to this one now? Yes, right. Okay, Councillor Corser, I'll go back to you.
Thank you. There was a lot of motion amendments to the amendments to the motion. I wanted to speak to specifically the weird conversations coming around the table, words that are being used like congregating, and it's my ward is one of these wards that are affected by this, deeply affected by this, because of old lots, size of lots, we're the built side of the city, and I have. To split the city in the way it is, it makes sense in so many ways, but and on the other hand, I'm so torn. And on the other hand, it's like it's almost exclusionary. It's a difficult thing for me to really wrap my head around. These conversations about making setbacks so people can't congregate around where they live kind of sounds not very a friendly approach to this. But on top of it all, I have to keep in mind a conversation that me and Miss Banfield had, that the actual cost to build a secondary or third suite is cost prohibitive to make it affordable in the first place, because it is actually expensive to build, and to recoup your money, the rent that you'd have to pay for it isn't affordable, and it doesn't make it affordable. Maybe at some point it would be, but my interest is in attainable housing. And I'm discovering very quickly that those second, third, fourth suites that we're talking about that are separate from the home, separately built, they will not be affordable in this market just because of the cost of build. So maybe if we're talking about in a separate side of the city, and I don't like, normally I would not like this idea that we'd have two separate sides of how we would do this in the city. But if maybe it would be much more affordable if you start from scratch, if the builder's involved in doing that, they have like the manpower, the materials, the ability to get things at a much cheaper price than maybe a homeowner would. So at this point, I think that maybe that it would be, I would support that, but I don't want it to, but at a different time in the future, if times change and we find ourselves in a different environment, I know that we're having buildings come up in density and high rises that actually really do create more density quicker, and more planned density. When in the older areas of the city, we have infrastructure to consider, we have different pressures to consider. It's really wrap your head around it, encyclopedia set of kind of things to look at. But at this point, I think I would support, didn't think I'd ever say this, but would support having a different set for the north end, the built area, as opposed to the annexed area, only because of what I stated. I don't want it to come across as something that is exclusionary or exclusive and or unwelcoming. But until we get to a point where we could actually do this affordably for people, I think that we need to make, I would keep this where it is, and if in the future, if things change where building costs come down and we're still in a housing crisis situation, maybe we can review this in a future time. But I think I support the motion as it stands now.
Thank you, Councillor. Just one quick second. So, Ms. Banfield, is it possible for you to not tonight, because I don't want to put something together on the fly that isn't exactly correct, to work with Clerk's Department and Legal Services on bringing some recommended verbiage for City Council for an amendment for next week with regards to the annexation lands and reduce setbacks compared to, or consistent setbacks with what you've brought forward, or is that not needed because the words within the boundary were used?
Mayor Nuttall, you did ask me to reach out to the landowners group to get their understanding, and we can certainly kind of come back with a quick memo for next week or an email to council. Certainly the way the amendment with that friendly piece, it's pretty clear to staff, so that's fine.
Wonderful, thank you. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Ms. Banfield, can you, while not every lot is the same, my concern with this, I'm sorry, I should have done a preamble and then gone to you. So the reality where accessory dwelling units are likely candidates, it's larger lots. I understand there's large lots in Ward 9 on Big Bay Point, and I understand there's small lots on Hickling Trail. But the reality is the candidates that we tend to see with applications tend to be, and I'll say it because, again, I feel for the councillors that definitely have a different reality than I do, is Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 8 for the most part. Again, there's units everywhere though. So could you speak to maybe the nature that if this amendment were to pass, I feel like we're maybe passing something with the best of intentions, but the reality is applications are not going to materialize by having future lots in the annexed lands, because those lots are just by their very nature getting smaller. A developer, they're in the business of building product. They build their singles, their semis, or their towns. Some of them are getting into stacked, but they're not necessarily in the business of doing ADUs, and they want to maximize, squeeze every single profit out of a dollar. So as appropriate, Ms. Banfield, could you speak to the nature of what you've seen with applications, whether they are they more likely coming in the existing built boundary, or do you see no difference between applications that come in what I would call the North End Barrie built boundary or even annex lands?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Morales. So again, there's most likely more detached units across the city, but not in the secondary plan areas. It's unlikely that detached units would be added to units in existing units in the secondary plan areas because they're pretty tight. Potentially the basement unit, but the lots are tight. But that doesn't mean that if council made changes that the developer may not do a different floor plan or make some different products to sell based on what's permitted. But definitely, I think it's with a lot of the units in the secondary plan areas, I think it's unlikely they're going to be able to fit a detached unit with any, quite frankly, with any standards. But the reduced standards for sure would provide more opportunity, but I do think it'll be a challenge.
And members of council, based on that comment, what can get us, and yes, some people, and I respect all councillors' intent. Some people want to hit that 600 units. Some people want to get as many units as possible, irregardless of whether we're getting money federally, and all those points are valid. But hearing the feedback from staff, the reality is a lot of the larger lots that we see in the north end of town, the oversized, underutilized lots, and underutilized, I mean just because they can fit more. It doesn't mean the homes aren't valuable or the people that live there. Those are the prime candidates. And I think, again, having these two set of standards is putting really noble focus, but just putting it in areas where the lots are just by their nature smaller. So I have a hard time supporting this. I don't think the support around the table is there, but I just want us to be aware. If people vote in favor of this amendment and they're aware of the reality of the things I've said, I have the utmost respect for that vote. But the reality is the prime candidates are oversized and corner lots in the north end, and I count a bit of Ward 8 in there as well, where these can be a possibility. So I won't be supportive of the amendment.
Just before we go to anyone else, Ms. Banfield, I could be completely wrong, but this is only one portion of the additional units that we're looking at. Is that correct?
Mayor Nuttall, you are correct. And even the 688 units are in addition to the units that we've already suggested will do a pledge to the province. So it's not 688 units in the next 3 years for the city of Barrie. It's 688 additional units, but 100% accessory dwelling units, second suite, third suites, fourth suites, no matter which way you look at it, it's only a portion, correct?
So we had 16 of them, 9 of them went to the Committee of Adjustment. 16 out of roughly 200, correct?
Correct, at a 255 last year, yeah.
Okay, so if I owned a home and I decided that, I wanted to do an addition and I was going to respect the fire code and I was going to put in a secondary suite attached to my home, how would I do that? What type of setbacks would I have to follow if tonight's motion passed? Would it be the 1.2 meters if I was in that zone, or 1.5, or would it be the 3 meters?
Mayor Nuttall, the discussions that we're talking about right now were only for a detached unit. So if you were going to finish your basement, the house is already there, so it would be a building permit for certainly fire and all sorts of those things, but it wouldn't necessarily relate to zoning.
What about an attached addition on the back?
So if you were just making an addition onto your house, Mayor Nuttall, you would have to apply the standards of the zone. So again, those examples I gave, if it was a 1.2 meter setback, and if you build an addition, that addition could be 1.2 meters away from the lot line.
Okay. And so what we're talking about right now is the standards with regards to 8% of the units that we've had coming forward. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about the 92. We're talking about the 8. So just keep that in perspective, and remember, when you vote tonight on these standards, even if you vote in the favor of the 3, right? The reality is there's still the 92% that can happen based on being attached to the home, a basement. Perhaps it's the change of a garage into a unit rather than on top of a unit. Those things can all happen. Those things are still going forward. We are still meeting the request of the minister. I'm sure if we asked him, he would say he would like laxer rules on all of the above, right? But with regards to the decisions we need to make, we need to both meet the commitment we've made to the minister, which is, I believe we're doing, at least in 92% plus, plus the annexation area, and we also have to balance that with what people will accept in the community. Because if they don't accept it, it's going to end up in a really bad situation, which I'm not sure if anyone else has any other questions. I have a parking question. And I want to understand between now and next week if there's a way to consider the parking requirements for all 100%, not just the 92, not just the 8, all 100%, and the current parking circumstances versus the proposed units. And I'll give you an example. I got a call from somebody today. They have a neighbor with 2 units. There's 4 cars. We passed this, they can do 4 units, but the 4 cars are taking up the 4 spaces on the driveway. And they're asking what happens to the vehicles, because when it comes into us, we look, okay, is it one unit, 1 car? Sure, you can have 4 units, but there's already 4 cars with 2 units. So is there any other municipalities or anywhere that you have seen that has an idea on how to regulate that specific piece? Is there a requirement for maybe using some of the federal or provincial funding on somebody coordinating that piece of it? We obviously want these things to happen. At the same time, we need to make sure that you can actually get an ambulance down a road. Is there anything out there that we've seen that can help us along this way?
Mayor Nuttall, the legislation is very clear that you have to have 1 parking space per unit, and that's the most that you can request. So we can't request any more than that. I haven't heard if people are doing different things. As I said, you can't require more parking. Again, keeping in mind that many of these, the idea is that these will go straight to a building permit. So the planning review from a building permit perspective is, do you meet the zoning? Yes, you do. It's a bit different if there's a minor variance or a planning application. There's a different level of review. The idea of this is that, does it have 4 spaces? Do they meet the size requirement? Can you actually drive into them? Like, can you access the parking spaces? So I'm not sure. I can certainly, we can ask around in the municipal network to see if there's other things people are doing besides the requirement, because as I said, the requirement is the most we can ask for is 1 unit or 1 parking space per unit.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Kunkel.
Just a quick comment to that, not to get us too far off track, but on your line of questioning about that specific to parking, it might be great to have a broader conversation in general when we're looking at higher density within residential, and just what does that actually mean by various bylaws? So what does that mean about, I believe current bylaw is 2 dogs per family. And so, when we're talking about compressing a space with how people live, what is the picture that actually is permissible for these situations that are broader than the conversation in the context we're having, which is building housing? It's about living well in a community, and how are we asking people to cope or manage within that, and what are we actually permitting, and where are we setting up people for conflict potentially? So that might be just something where when we're talking about density in residential too, not people live with many animals in a different type of setting, but you usually have a different dynamic when you're looking at shared green space on a residential property.
Yeah, like more dog parks, more.
Yeah, or even just like, do those bylaws still fit around managing expectations of having potentially 6 dogs, legitimately 8 dogs, legitimately on a 4-unit dwelling?
It's an interesting point.
Yeah. You got me on fireworks now. I like dogs. I like dogs and beavers.
Yeah.
They're going to change my reputation.
The pro-dog vote's coming for you. Let me just put it that way. Okay, are there any other questions or comments with regards to the main motion? I'm seeing none. All those in favor of the main motion? All those opposed? Thank you. On the amendment, not the main motion. And opposed? It carries. On the main motion, any other comments or questions? Seeing none. All those in favor of the main motion? It carries. Jim, I saw both your real hand and your fake hand. Did I miss you on some more comments?
Yeah, sorry, that was on the main motion. sorry.
Yeah, why don't I permit you to speak because I missed it, so I apologize.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I know a lot of our conversation about the setbacks kind of covered a lot of territory on the main motion. I think for me, I wanted to comment on the main motion. I think, again, in looking at the data, and thank you, Ms. Banfield, for answering my questions today, and looking at, the number of detached accessory dwelling units and the secondary suites, and recognizing that a significant greater number of units are obtained by having the secondary dwelling in the home, so those basement apartments. And I was, given where we are and given where we've worked really hard as a city with infill projects, with understanding the urban growth center and transit hubs and intensification nodes and corridors. Like for me, and I know it's a new, and I was trying to find research and data and communities that have gone to a 4-unit per residential, and I wasn't able to find much. And as some have mentioned, and I think it was Councillor Corsi who mentioned the conversations around what it does to pricing. I found some literature. It was out of California regarding the increase in, we have affordability housing prices too, affordability and accessibility or availability. So, the added dwellings actually make the houses more affordable, more expensive, right? So, I think we're doing a lot of great things in the community. We're meeting the provincial targets. Actually, we're exceeding them. I think given the parameters that we have with the already having the provincial direction to have a 3rd unit. And so I think we have that tool. I'm not sure early adopters of the 4 units are going to be, born out to be, the best decision. So I do like the idea of staying at 3 and continuing to see where we do get the gains, which is the basement apartments or the secondary unit in the home, and incentivize or some fun ways to make that happen, because that's where, like last year it was 94%. The year before was even higher percentage of the units that were that we gained through that type of zoning. So anyway, I just want to make a comment. I'm not in favor of the full motion, but I was certainly happy with keeping the setbacks as they were amended in 2021, given their response and the learning that we received from the original zoning that was for detached accessory dwelling units. So that's my thoughts on the. I'd be much happier to stay with 3 than 4.
That concludes the update from City Hall. Thank you.